last video, we talked about how when you select two different STL files, it brings up new options under the edit menu. And one of them is the Boolean operations. Now notice there's three different operations. There's Boolean union, difference, and intersection. I want to just show you those, and then I want to dive in a little deeper to talk about them a little bit more. Boolean union is basically, and so notice here I have the same thing 3 times. I just have a cube and a sphere that intersect. I want to run this tool on each of these to show you the difference between them. And actually, when I go to this middle one, I'm going to go ahead and do it twice. Okay, so let's get another one down here. All right. Let's hit accept. So let's go back into this right here. So the Boolean union, it essentially is similar to what you get when you do a make solid. Okay. In fact, a lot of times when people are advocating for a make solid, my response would be don't, because it messes up other things. Do a Boolean union instead, because you preserve more of the original information yet you can add to it. But it's going to keep everything, but it's going to eliminate the inside stuff. So if I were to drag this, notice that in the inside part right here, that is what is going to get deleted. Okay. And so let me show you. Let's go to here. And if I do a selection, let's see, double click on, oh, sorry, double click on this other one. So if you look right through here, this is showing the part of my sphere that is inside that cube. And if I did the same thing to the cube, or I select my cube, I hit S and I double click the sphere, you can see that there's this area where they overlap. Okay, that is what's going to go away. All right, so let me just show you this one. So it's going to look pretty much the same, and I'm not going to do much refinement right now. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I'm just going to hit Boolean union, let it do its thing. I'm not going to mess around with any of the settings, and we're going to hit accept. Okay, now notice that it did not result in a good end result, and the reason for that has a lot to do with triangles. Okay, if you notice right here, these triangles, let me back up, notice that it's trying to do some things here, but because these triangles are so big and this operation affects things around the triangles, it will cause problems. Okay, and maybe for the sake of discussion, maybe what I'll do is do one bit of remeshing on this. Let's go to at least there. Okay, and we'll hit accept. So we've got a little bit better situation when it comes to the triangles, but let's do a Boolean union again, hit accept. And so it's better, but it's still not great. And I want it to be that way right now because I want to talk about that in a little bit. So this right here, if I take my shaders and I bring it over here, notice how now those overlapping parts just aren't there anymore. Okay, so let's bring that back. And now let's come to this one. So with the Boolean, or let's do this one first. Okay, the Boolean intersection, that is the opposite of a Boolean union. So it keeps the inside, but it deletes the rest. And so let's go ahead and do a Boolean, or let's first, just for the sake of keeping things the same, let's select A, R for remesh. It was the linear subdivision, and I forgot to look at the number to get it to be where we wanted it. I'll look this time, so it's about 28. We'll hit accept, and then we'll do that on these ones as well. Select all R, 28, accept. That way we can have all of these being the same. 28 and accept. All right. So we still have a mismatch in the triangles, but it'll be fine for now. Boolean intersection. See what it's doing is it's doing the opposite of this, where it's keeping the intersections but getting rid of the rest. I'm not going to play around with the settings. We're just going to hit accept. So as you can see, it doesn't look very clean, but that can be improved on. All right, so then we have our Boolean difference. Now, the reason I do this twice is with this one, it doesn't matter which one you select first. Okay, but when you get to a Boolean difference, it does matter. If I select the cube first, hold down Shift and then hit the sphere, and I do a Boolean difference, notice it keeps the cube and it gets rid of the sphere. Again, I'm not going to change the settings. Whereas if I hit the sphere first, hold down Shift, then the cube, and do a Boolean difference, it does the opposite. Okay, so right there, now you can see kind of the difference between these different operations. This just combines the outer shells, deletes the inside. This keeps the inside, deletes the outer stuff, and this uses one object to subtract from the second object. Okay, so that gives you kind of an idea on what all these different tools are going to do. I'm going to go back to this one, and I'm going to undo. We're going to take these and just hide them for now, and take these, and I want to play around a little bit with some of the settings. Now, one way that you can improve the situation of having things come together better is change the triangles. Okay, and what I mean by that is that if we come through like this and we select these triangles, and maybe that's more than we needed, if we want to manually come through here and change these by remeshing them, okay, so we do something like that, that is going to get the triangle sizes closer together so that we end up with a better result. If I were to accept this and go through and do a Boolean difference on them and hit accept, it's going to end up with something a little better because the triangles got smaller. Okay, but there's better options than that yet. I'm going to back up, back up, back up. And technically, we could have left the original the way it was and still had a good Boolean, because the actual Boolean difference properties provides us a lot of things to work with. So let's go over some of that. And they're the same for all of them. All these things you see right here, they're the same for union, intersection, and Boolean difference. Boolean difference is the one that people use the most, so that's the one we're going to look at. Different modes. We have precise and we have a fast approximate. One thing you'll notice about a fast approximate is that it leaves kind of an ugly looking end result. Okay. One thing to note is that the way that it does the Booleans is the software first looks for anything that is in any triangles that are intersecting. Okay. Starts off with that, deletes those. Then what it does is it goes to those areas and it starts to close the gap, like pull things closer together. And then once they're closed together, and it does, I mean, I think before it deletes it, it automatically increases the triangles. Then it deletes anything that's overlapping, so it leaves a gap. But then it starts to kind of pull in towards the gap. And you'll notice that when you do the fast approximate, it pulls things and kind of curves them in. We've seen that before, and that was when we looked at the join tool. When you use the join tool, it kind of ignores those edges, the triangles on the edge, and it kind of pulls them inward, and that's what is happening here, and that's why you end up with this option. So it's fast, but it doesn't give us what we want. Precise gives us a much nicer one, and then my understanding with max quality is that you won't see much in the preview, but with max quality, I believe what it does is as you tell the tool to go for it, it just increases. It kind of kicks things up, more triangles, better resolution, things like that. But normally you can get a pretty good result when you go and mess around with some of these settings. And so normally I leave it on precise. Search depth is is something you see in a lot of tools in Mesh Mixer. And what that does is the software is like, for example, at the beginning when it's changing how many times or how small the triangles are getting. It's like it goes through a pass and then another pass. Search depth is telling, it's like forcing it to look a little deeper. And sometimes when you have regions that are really close together, the search depth will push the software to go a little further before it gives up, before it has a failure. And it doesn't matter really if you kick it up really high, because it's always going to stop when it solves the problem. So you notice when I drug that up, it didn't change anything. It looks the same. That's because it already early on was able to figure this one out. So you're going to use search depth when you run into problems. If for example you go to do a Boolean and the whole thing turns that kind of maroon color, that means it's going to fail. And so one of the first places you might want to go to is the search depth to drag that over, because that's giving the software permission to try it again, but with smaller triangles. Okay. Preserve a group border. I'm going to talk about that. Actually, let's talk about that right now. Okay. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to click on my cube. Now, obviously, not everything is going to work out this nice, but with a cube, it actually works fairly well to do the generate face groups, hit accept. So now when I do my Boolean, it's preserving the face group borders, which is going to create a sharp edge right there. So if I come in and do that Boolean again, okay, and see how, like, I don't know if you noticed it, but before this was starting to fail right there. It was starting to collapse in on itself. So preserving a group border is going to be telling the software to keep that. And so it keeps those sharp edges. And so if I did nothing else but that and hit accept, notice that in the end, and I'm going to get rid of this, notice how already I'm seeing a better result. Okay. Now, there was one extra step I had to take. I had to go in and add those group borders, but you can see that with the tool for generating face groups, that was very quick and easy to do. And yet we have like a really nice result with very little effort. So I'm going to hit undo, undo, undo. Now, if I didn't have, let's hit cancel. If I didn't have any face groups, then that option isn't going to do anything for me. Okay, so I've got that. See that right there? Let me center on it and zoom in a little bit. See that where it's failing, because right here my edge is preserved, but I hit that spot and then suddenly my edge is not being preserved anymore. So that can be a really nice option, but notice it doesn't matter because I don't have any face groups. Okay, the auto reduce results, that one is a good tool, because if you were to look right, and depending on what you're doing, certain things this will be much more noticeable than others. But look at my triangles. See how my triangles in the preview have taken these and they made them very, very small. Okay, but notice what happens when I have that checked and I hit accept. Watch those triangles. Notice how the triangles changed. So basically what it did is it did the operation, and as a last step, it took the triangles and did a reduce function on them, but without giving us much feedback as to what's going on. So I'm going to hit undo. So if you don't want that to happen, if you uncheck the auto reduce and then hit accept, notice how it is exactly what we saw in the preview. Okay, so often I'm just automatically hitting that uncheck option because too often it causes me problems. Okay, so we'll leave that one unchecked. I want to zoom in a little bit to this edge right here. Okay, so let's center that. So if you look right here, notice how we can see a gap. Okay, the gap is there only because Mesh Mixer is giving you a preview. It's not showing you the final results. It's showing you like a couple iterations in. See where it says preview iterations? If I start to drag this up, for one, if I drag it down, you'll see that that's right around the time that it deleted triangles. But then as I start to bring this up, and we'll do it this way, there's 1 and then 2, And see how it's starting to show you? So it's almost like you're getting to see what's happening. So there's 3, 4, and see how it's coming together, and it's showing you what it's going to be doing as it goes through the operation. Eventually, you're going to hit a point where you're not going to see any changes anymore. But see how it's slowly getting better and better. So it's showing you closer and closer to where the end result's going to be. Okay, so right here, it shows that everything's closed. Okay, but that's a preview. So obviously, in that last one, when I put in 20, you could see that there was actually a bar. The more you choose to see, the more calculations that are going on, and the more you might have to wait as you're messing around with your settings. My understanding on this use intersection curve is that it's almost like where the two objects overlap, there's like an imaginary line, and it almost seems to me, and it depends maybe on what you're looking at as to how well it shows what I'm trying to describe, but it seems to me that when you click on this, it approximates that better. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click this, and I want you to notice that just by clicking that, it pulled things in a little tighter. Okay, so I think that's a great one to use because it pulls things closer toward where those two objects intersected. Okay, and then the target edge scale is talking about how many triangles are along this edge. So notice if I pull it this way, away from one, those triangles can get bigger. Whereas if I pull them this way, or sorry, other way around. When I pull it this way, they get much bigger, which loses some of the detail. Whereas if I pull it the other way, things start to get very, very small. And obviously, if you're taking triangles and then cutting them into a bunch of smaller triangles, just like a remesh operation, and then maybe I pulled them a little too far, but see where that pulls everything in and it makes much smaller triangles. So smaller triangles means something is going to be a crisper, better end result, but it comes at the expense of it's going to take longer. So depending on your computer, that might take a very, very long time. The merge border rings is talking about this area right here. This is the border, and merging them is, because I will tell you that these right here, where you have a big triangle next to these smaller triangles, while it works, it's going to make other tools very difficult to work with. I'm going to back this up a little bit. I just put it on 0.5. Now notice with the merging the border rings, if I pull it in this way, you're not seeing much difference. But if you start to drag it out the opposite direction, let's keep going with it, and you could start to see things blending better. This might be too many triangles to show what I want to show. Let me do this. I'm going to bring this back to where it was before, and then let's see. Because if there's too many triangles, it doesn't reach this outer border, and that's what I was interested. I want this outer border to go away if I can. So you can see that by messing around with these a little bit, you can get that outer border to be a little bit better of a blend. Okay, now notice when we do that, we're starting to lose some of that sharp edge right there, but we know how we can get rid of those things by using the preserved group borders, but having a group border. So there's a lot of things you can play around with, and it depends on what you want that end result to be. Okay. And so I can go ahead and bring that back, or maybe I'll just come up here and say reset to defaults. Okay, so that brings us back to the defaults. We're going to uncheck the auto reduce. And if you want this to be the best result possible, you just click uncheck that, check that, and change this to something smaller, and then hit accept. Okay. And that's going to give you, if you turn off your wireframes, that's going to give you something that looks pretty good, and the only spot where you're suffering is these corners. And we already mentioned that one way to get around that, and I'm just going to hit undo, I'm going to hit cancel, is to do that thing we talked about where we come in, we generate face groups, we hit accept, and now we do a Boolean difference on that. And now if we do those same things, if we just uncheck that and check that and hit accept, notice that we get a much, much nicer result all the way around, okay? So that gives you an idea, and it's the same thing. If I do undo and I hit cancel, but I leave those, but now I want to do a Boolean union, it's the same idea that I can preserve the group borders, and I can do these same things and hit accept and end up with a pretty clean junction between those two. And if you turn on those, it actually looks pretty good. And if you don't want that sharpness around there, you can play around with these the merge border. But like I said, you'll have to reduce those some. So see right here, we don't have any weird transitions between things, and yet in the end, we still have a really nice end result. So I think, you know, maybe the takeaway, and it doesn't always work, unfortunately, depending on what you're trying to use as a tool to go into something. Sometimes you don't have like a sharp edge that you can simply put a face group up against and preserve that. But I think that using the face groups and having that face group border, or whatever they called it, let me hit undo, this preserve group borders, I personally feel like that's going to be the best option you have to go ahead and get a nice result. I just do want to mention, let me hit this one again, that while this is going to give a good result, these triangles, anytime you end up with situations like this, where this triangle is very long and skinny, and sometimes it gets worse than that, those are fine until later you come back and you try to do like you try to hit it with a sculpting tool, something like that. It becomes problematic. I will also point out though that when you, that one actually, because we allowed it to do the auto reduce, isn't too bad. What I was going to show you, which applies to either, is that if you end up with something like this, you can go into the sculpting tool where it says reduce, and you just have to be careful not to hit anything that is holding good information. But see how you can, what I meant is if you hit the edge, it starts to mess it up. So you don't want to go near anything that could be damaging, but you can mess around with that a little bit. And let's see, reduce more. So this is, so you can see you can get a little bit better transition, or maybe if we kind of hit that, I don't know. It's important to pay attention to these, and I almost think we had a better result when we, here, I'm gonna just undo quite a bit here. Let's go back to where we were. I think that when we use that group, here we go, right here. I almost think that when we had our face groups and we used the auto reduce, that gave us a pretty nice result, okay? Let me undo. I'm just curious to see which one I like more. That one, or if I come in and I increase this, but I increase this more, and maybe more, and maybe more. Hard to say which one I like the most, okay? But both of them, that one I kind of like that more, just because it gives me, it stays away from areas where my triangles are getting too far off from like an equilateral. But yet notice that we still have this really nice result. So face groups are big, And the more you start to think in that way of using face groups, the more powerful you can be to run a lot of the different tools in Mesh Mixer. So one of the problems people often run into with a Boolean operation is a situation where the two different objects have triangles that are just about perfectly overlapped, and it creates a lot of problems. And I haven't played around with this a lot. Let me hit undo and get back into here. But this bottom one we didn't talk about, where it says handle coplanarity. My understanding, and I'll have to wait until the day comes that I hit another one of these situations, but really, like, one of the best tools you have, and I mentioned this at the start of the course, is the manual that Autodesk puts out for Mesh Mixer. I do a lot of my research just by looking at that. And if you look at this this one they have right here, where it's talking about a situation where the two objects have too much overlapping and the tool struggles because it sees all of these different pieces and it doesn't know how to handle them. Well, you can check the handle coplanarity box, and then it allows you to change the delta value. And as it says right here, increasing the value increases what the software considers as noise, until it got to a point where it said, well, none of this needs to stick around, and it completely chopped the head off. I tried to replicate that and it didn't work, and it just kept being for one, it never showed it like this. It kept showing my bunny as a full bunny. The whole thing was maroon, and so I wasn't able to replicate that, but it did give me some thoughts of problems I've had in the past. And so that's something that would be interesting to try, but it does say right here, super experimental feature. Okay, so I think that's why I was having a hard time replicating it, because they're trying to improve this for those times that you run into problems. But I've seen a lot of people in dentistry, especially when you're, say somebody is trying to do a Boolean onto a wax up that they did because they want to make a snap-on smile. You run into this a lot in a situation like that, where you have triangles that are overlapping in this direction. Booleans work very well when your triangles overlap 90 degrees to each other, but when they're almost on the same plane, that's where the Booleans struggle. That might be a solution to try to get away from those problems. But like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but it was interesting to read more about it and to see this example that they shared. So hopefully that gives you a little more confidence in doing Boolean operations. Just know that it comes down to triangles. And if you can't use the group border preservation to get nice crisp borders, know that you can go in and change triangles to clean up that edge and make it something that you're happier with. So hop to it and have fun, cutting pieces into pieces.